a few weeks ago, first in this series on white supremacy and its growing role in the United States right now. And at this hearing, we discovered through expert witness testimony that not all of these incidents seem to be treated with the similar consistency. But we've also heard from experts that whether the FBI classifies extremist violence as, quote, domestic terrorism or a hate crime has major implications on resource allocation and prioritization within the Bureau. Mr. McGarity, the FBI considers preventing terrorism its #1 priority. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
And Mr. Shivers, what about civil rights violations, such as hate crimes? How do they rank among the FBI priorities?
Within the civil rights program, it is the #1 priority.
So within the civil rights program, but the FBI overall, doesn't it seem that FBI agents would have more of an incentive to pursue domestic terrorism cases over hate crime cases?
Well, again, sometimes those cases overlap. And so in a number of instances, you may have a civil rights investigation and a domestic terrorism investigation open.
Mm-hmm. And I do see here that the civil rights program policy instructs agents to open parallel terrorism investigations whenever a suspect of a hate crime has any nexus to a white supremacist group, correct?
Correct.
We've seen white supremacist attacks that were clearly domestic terrorism. Experts, in fact, the acting AG, Jeff Sessions, even called some of these incidents domestic terrorism incidents. The Emmanuel AME Church shooting of Black Americans in Charleston and the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh of Jewish people, those were only designated and charged as hate crimes, not domestic terrorist incidents. Mr. McGarity, why did the FBI not believe that these incidents were domestic terrorist incidents?
That's not correct. I don't know who told you that we didn't, but we certainly had cases open on them in both those cases, and I wasn't here for the Dylan Roof case, but it's certainly in our own Department of Justice Civil Rights about 3-4 weeks ago, and their testimony actually stated that it was a domestic terrorism event charged through the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice for a hate crime. I was here for the Tree of Life. I will tell you, I remember that day distinctly. It was worked as both a domestic terrorism case and a hate crimes case, and it still worked that way.
And so you are disputing that the AME, you're saying that AME was charged with domestic terrorism, Dylan Roof.
So you're using the word charge. So as I said before, there's no domestic terrorism charge like 18 U.S.C. 2339 A, B, C, D for a foreign terrorist organization. So what we do, both on the international terrorism side with homegrown violent extremists and domestic terrorists, we'll use any tool in the toolkit to arrest them, hopefully left of attack. Should it be after, likely that hate crime statute will come to play through the Civil Rights Division as a charge, because it's a good federal charge for us to use.
And the Tree of Life.
It shouldn't be stated that it's not a domestic terrorism. In fact, on the record, it's stated it's a domestic terrorism.
And the same thing with the synagogue shooting?
Yes.
So you're okay. So we have two conflicting testimonies.
So, well, I mean, I can go back to May 8, 2019 from the Department of Justice. On the record, that statement called it domestic terrorism cases involving civil rights charges too, including some of the most serious attacks in recent years. Dylan Roof, African American parishioners engaged at the Emmanuel African Methodist Church, James Field at the Unite to Right rally in Virginia, and then also Robert Bowers.
So that's the
all
statement.
3 events were domestic terrorism.
But the actual charge, was the actual charge domestic terrorism?
You're not going to find an actual charge of domestic terrorism out there. If you look at Title 18, right? If you're looking for...
Well, it says here that, but at the San Bernardino shooting or the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting, they were designated and charged as domestic terrorist incidents.
They were charged, I'd have to go back and look, they were charged likely with, if there was a connection to a foreign terrorist organization, it would likely fall under 18 U.S.C. 23 A or B.
So because the perpetrator was Muslim, doesn't it seem that because the perpetrator is Muslim,
that's not correct. That has nothing
that
to do,
the designation would say it's a foreign organization?
That's not correct. That is not correct.
Okay. Can you explain why?
So, homegrown violent extremists, most of the people we arrest in the United States, homegrown violent extremists, self-radicalized, born in the U.S., Doesn't matter what religion.
But the Orlando Post Club shooter meets those qualifications, and you're implying...
He was worked as an international terrorist because he was following under the definition...
But he was homegrown and self-radicalized.
Extremist cases, how we work homegrown violent extremist cases, under the global jihad, we worked under international terrorism. That is correct.
Is white supremacy not a global issue?
It is a global issue.
So why are they not charged with foreign...
Because the United States Congress doesn't have a statute for us for domestic terrorism like we do on a foreign terrorist organization like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab.
Could you see how this could create issues and discrepancies with how violent extremism by Muslim perpetrators could potentially, even if it's unintentional, but that there are holes and there are gaps here, not through your fault or any one specific person's fault. It could be our fault as Congress. But could you see how one could see how the way that we are pursuing and charging white supremacy, particularly if they tend to be charged with hate crimes and where that same type of violence committed by a Muslim extremist could be charged with domestic terrorism. Hate crimes and domestic terrorism are treated and charged. They're different crimes, and they could be pursued differently with different resource allocations. Can you see how people would say that these are being treated differently?
Some of the definitions we're using, I think we're talking past each other. But I will tell you from the domestic terrorism side and on the international terrorism side, on the domestic terrorism side, we don't charge, of those approximately 115 arrests we did last year, not all of them were hate crime charges. Okay. We're going to charge someone left of attack with any charge we have under Title 18 in the U.S. Code or a state and local charge. So predominantly, I would say I'd have to go back and look. Most of them are not hate crime charges on the domestic terrorism side. Okay.
Thank you very much. I will now move to recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Kelly.
Hi. You're a hard man to reach to. I'm glad I made it today. My name's Felix. I have a question for you about healthcare.
All right.
I disagree with you on this issue. We spend more on per capita than any other country in the world and have some of the worst results. According to the World Health Organization, we were 37th in 2000, 49th in 2009, and 50th in 2010. We also lead in mortality amenable to healthcare with over 45,000 people that will die every year because of it. The top 17 countries, and I have the list right here, that have the best healthcare in the world uses some form of universal healthcare, whether that be single payer or two-tiered system or a government-mandated program. I am curious to know why you continue to deny that universal healthcare is an effective system. And before you answer the question, I personally would advocate for a two-tiered system, not single payer.
Okay. So the answer is that it depends on what you're going for. Really, it does. There's a couple reasons. Well, let me put it this way. Here's the framework that I use when I'm thinking about healthcare. Before that, just organizing my thoughts here. Before that, the first thing to mention is that all of the countries that are doing really well on healthcare also were doing well on healthcare before the implementation of a nationalized healthcare system. It's not the national healthcare system that changed Sweden into a healthy country or Norway into a healthy country. These were healthy countries before that happened. That's just the way it is. The United States is mainly unhealthy because we eat a bunch of shit here, right? I mean, that really is the reason. Our diet is really different than it is in, for example, Japan or in Norway, where people tend to exercise more and are healthier as an overall metric. So comparing populations is not like, it depends on where you are comparing. If you compare Norwegians in the United States to people who live in Norway, my guess is you probably wouldn't see an enormous difference in the level of health care obtained. Number two, the United States healthcare system is a disaster area. It's actually the worst of all possible worlds. It is not a free market system, and it's not a totally regulated system. It's somewhere in between, which means it's heavily regulated and heavily subsidized, which leads to increased costs. That's why it's so expensive. When we say that we're spending an enormous amount per capita, we should define who the we is. The we is not the government. The we is the government plus private expenditures on health care. Now, it's my decision whether I want to spend a lot of money on end-of-life care. It's my decision whether I want to spend a lot of money on immediate care. So it's not quite a one-to-one ratio the way that people are making it out to be. And that's why in the United States, for example, when it comes to 5-year cancer survival rates, we actually rank #1 in the world. That's because you actually have availability of health care if you can pay for it. The question is, how do you bring the cost down? So now to my model of how I think about health care. Dan McLaughlin in National Review puts it this way. He says you can have 3 things in healthcare. You can have affordability, universality, and quality. Those are the 3 things that you're looking for in healthcare. Every system can guarantee no better than 2. So most of the systems that you're talking about, if they are universal, they are not affordable in the sense that the government does rack up enormous surcharges on that basis. Now, that may not be as much as we're spending here, because as I say, we have the worst of all available systems. We're not free market and we're not nationalized. But Canada's healthcare system is extraordinarily expensive. Britain's healthcare is extraordinarily expensive. Norway's healthcare is extraordinarily expensive, which is why the tax rates on people in the middle class and lower classes is still exorbitantly high. Like, the United States actually has a far more progressive system of taxation than Switzerland or Sweden or Norway. Right? All of those countries have income taxes of 60% for folks making about 60 grand a year. It's really, really high. There is a cost to it. Now, the question is, what are you looking for? So what I am looking for is affordability and quality and not universality. Universal health care is good if you're looking for universality. If you're looking for universality and affordability, you don't spend a lot of money and you ration health care. You see some single-payer systems that are like this. If you're looking for universality and quality, then you don't care that much about affordability. You just spend an awful lot of money on it. And if you're looking for quality and affordability, then you have a free market system, because that's what free markets generate. They can generate near universality, but not complete universality. This is true for food products, for example. It's not true that everyone has equal access to food, but food is extraordinarily cheap in the United States and very high quality, at least what you can get. So the question is, how do you wish to define the balance between rights and duties in a civilized society? My answer is I want affordability and quality, and I want social fabric picking up the rest, particularly at local level and hopefully before you get to the governmental level. The problem I have with the universal healthcare system is that it tends to drive down supply of doctors and nurses unless you spend exorbitant amounts of cash, right? You have to import people from other countries to do that work. This is what's happened in Britain, where they're importing a lot of their healthcare system from India, for example. Or you have to spend enormous sums of money. So are there nationalized healthcare systems that are better than ours? Yeah, there are. Australia is better than ours. Switzerland is better than ours. And I agree with you. If you were going to do this, you would want a two-tiered system, right, which is more like Switzerland. But in my view, the best of all available systems would be a wild deregulation of the healthcare system itself, leading to lowered costs, higher quality, and then what's left over can be filled in with relatively minimal investment.
Just one thing. Can I email you with some responses?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks. Love you too.
Good afternoon, Ben.
Hey,
my question is on Marbury v. Madison and judicial review. Would this be your primary argument against Roe v. Wade, that it was passed and it isn't in the Constitution? And do you think, as a follow-up to this, do you think it would be a better stance for social conservatives to take a libertarian approach, to say that you're against abortion for the moral reasons, but that you would support it if it was passed through the states?
No.
The
So when it comes to Marbury versus Madison and the place of judicial review, I don't like judicial review as a basic element of the system. I think it's quite controversial whether Marbury versus Madison